They say black boys become men at 18. I became one at 19 when I discovered that my parents had stolen the $80,000 that our community raised to honor my murdered 16-year-old brother, and I had to choose between protecting their reputation or honoring his memory. My name is Antoine Jackson, and this is the story of how I sent my own parents to prison for using my brother's death as a business opportunity. The night my brother Jamal died is burned into my memory with the kind of clarity that trauma brings. It was a warm Saturday evening in June, and Jamal had just come home from basketball practice at the community center. He was 16 years old, a sophomore in high school, and one of the best point guards in our city. College scouts were already coming to watch his games, and he had dreams of playing Division I basketball and eventually going to the NBA. "Antoine," he said to me as he walked through our front door that evening, his basketball still under his arm. "Coach says if I keep improving my three-point shot, I could probably get a full ride to a big school. Can you believe that? Me going to college for free." "I always believed in you, little bro," I said, giving him a fist bump. I was 19, had graduated high school the year before, and was working at the UPS warehouse while trying to save money for community college. Watching Jamal excel at basketball gave me hope that at least one person in our family would make it out of our struggling neighborhood through legitimate means. "I am going to take a shower and then head over to Marcus's house to play some video games," Jamal said. "You want to come?" "Nah, I am tired from work. You be careful walking over there. It has been a lot of shooting lately." "I will be fine. Marcus only lives 3 blocks away." Those were the last words my brother ever said to me. About an hour later, I was in my room scrolling through my phone when I heard gunshots outside. Gunshots were not unusual in our neighborhood. We heard them several times a week, but these sounded close, really close. I ran to the window and looked outside. In the dim light from the street lamps, I could see a body lying on the sidewalk about 50 feet from our front door. Even from that distance, even in the darkness, I recognized the basketball jersey. "Mama! Daddy!" I screamed as I ran down the stairs and out the front door. "Call 911. It is Jamal." I reached my brother just as neighbors started coming out of their houses. He was lying on his back, blood spreading across his chest and stomach from multiple gunshot wounds. His eyes were open but unfocused, and he was trying to say something, but only blood came out of his mouth. "Jamal, stay with me," I said, pressing my hands against his wounds and trying to stop the bleeding. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." But even as I said the words, I knew they were not true. There was too much blood, too many wounds. My little brother was dying on the sidewalk outside our house, and there was nothing I could do to save him. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. The paramedics worked on Jamal for several minutes before one of them looked at me and shook his head. "I am sorry, son. He is gone." My parents arrived on the scene just as the paramedics were covering Jamal's body with a sheet. Mama collapsed on the sidewalk screaming, and Daddy had to hold her up to keep her from falling. Neighbors gathered around, crying and hugging each other, shocked that this violence had taken someone we all knew and loved. The police investigation revealed that Jamal had been caught in the crossfire of a gang dispute. He was not involved in any gang activity. He was literally just walking to his friend's house. But 2 rival gang members had started shooting at each other on our street, and Jamal was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The shooter who killed Jamal was never caught. The witnesses who saw what happened were too afraid of retaliation to testify, and the police had no physical evidence linking any specific person to the shooting. My brother's murder became another unsolved homicide in a city where young black men were dying every week from gun violence. The days following Jamal's death were a blur of grief, anger, and overwhelming sadness. Our small house was constantly filled with family members, friends, neighbors, and people from the community who wanted to pay their respects. Jamal had been well known and well loved, not just for his basketball talent, but for his kindness, his infectious smile, and his determination to succeed despite growing up in difficult circumstances. That boy had a bright future ahead of him. Pastor Williams said during one of his visits to our house. He was going to make it out of this neighborhood and show everyone what was possible. Now he is gone, Mama said, sobbing. My baby is gone, and we do not even have money to give him a proper funeral. That was when someone suggested starting a GoFundMe campaign. Mrs. Washington, our neighbor who ran the community center where Jamal played basketball, offered to set up the fundraising page. We need to come together as a community to help this family, she announced during a vigil for Jamal at the community center. The Jackson family should not have to worry about funeral costs while they are grieving. Let us show them that we take care of our own. Within hours, the GoFundMe page was live with the title, "Help the Jackson Family Honor Jamal's Memory." The description explained that Jamal had been an innocent victim of gun violence, that he was a talented student athlete with a bright future, and that the family needed financial support for funeral expenses and to help them through this difficult time. Any amount helps, the description read. Let us show this family that their community stands with them in their time of need. The response was overwhelming. People from our neighborhood, our church, Jamal's school, and even strangers who had heard about his story started donating. $5 here, $20 there, sometimes $100 from someone who had been touched by Jamal's story. Local news stations picked up the story, and donations started coming in from all over the city and eventually from other states. People were moved by the tragedy of a promising young athlete being killed for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Within 2 weeks, the GoFundMe campaign had raised over $80,000. Antoine, can you believe this? Mama said, showing me the fundraising page on her phone. $80,000. The community really came through for us. That is amazing, Mama. Jamal would be happy to know how much people cared about him. We can give him the funeral he deserves now. A real homegoing service with everything done right. Jamal's funeral took place on a hot Saturday afternoon in July at Mount Olive Baptist Church. The church was packed with over 300 people, family, friends, teammates, teachers, coaches, and community members who wanted to pay their respects. Jamal's casket was white and gold, and he was dressed in his basketball uniform at Mama's request. He loved basketball more than anything, she said. It is only right that he goes to meet the Lord wearing what he loved. Pastor Williams delivered a powerful eulogy about young black men being lost to violence, about the need for community change, and about Jamal's potential that would never be realized. Jamal Jackson should be here today, planning his college applications and perfecting his three-point shot, Pastor Williams said. Instead, we are laying him to rest because our streets are not safe for our children. We must do better. We must demand better. And we must honor Jamal's memory by fighting for a world where no other mother has to bury her 16-year-old son. The funeral was beautiful and heartbreaking. The entire basketball team served as pallbearers. The choir sang Jamal's favorite gospel songs. People stood up to share memories of his kindness, his humor, his work ethic, and his dreams. After the funeral, there was a repast at the community center where people shared more stories and supported our family. It felt like the entire neighborhood had come out to celebrate Jamal's life and mourn his death. Your family is in our prayers, person after person told me. We are here for whatever you need. I truly felt supported and loved by our community during those difficult days. And I was grateful that the GoFundMe campaign had made it possible to give Jamal a funeral that honored his memory properly. But then I started noticing things that did not make sense. About 3 weeks after the funeral, Daddy came home driving a brand new BMW 3 Series. It was black with leather seats, premium sound system, and all the bells and whistles. Daddy, where did that car come from? I asked when I saw him pulling into our driveway. I got a good deal from a guy at work, he said. Been saving up for a while, and the timing was finally right. You have been saving up? Since when? We have never had extra money for savings. Antoine, do not question me about my finances. I am the man of this house, and I know how to manage money. But something about the timing felt wrong. We had just buried Jamal. Mama was not working because she was too grief-stricken to go back to her job at the grocery store. And I knew Daddy's salary as a city bus driver was not enough to afford a $40,000 car. Then, about a week later, Mama came home with shopping bags from expensive stores downtown, places like Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue that I had never been able to afford before. "Mama, what is all this?" I asked, seeing designer labels on the bags. "I needed some new clothes, baby. I have been wearing the same old things for years. A woman deserves to treat herself sometimes." "But Mama, where did you get the money for designer clothes? We have never shopped at these kinds of stores." "Antoine, I am a grown woman. I do not need to explain my shopping habits to my 19-year-old son." Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Daddy bought a new widescreen television, a PlayStation 5, and expensive sneakers. Mama got her hair done at an upscale salon, started getting her nails done every week, and bought more designer clothes and jewelry. Meanwhile, our house was still in the same rundown condition it had always been in. The roof still leaked when it rained. The kitchen appliances were still old and barely working. The carpet was still stained and worn out. If my parents suddenly had money to spend on luxury items, why were not they using it to fix the problems with our house? And more importantly, where was this money coming from? I tried to dismiss my suspicions. Maybe Daddy really had been saving money. Maybe Mama had received a settlement from a lawsuit I did not know about. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for their sudden spending spree. But then I overheard a conversation between my parents that confirmed my worst fears. It was a Saturday evening about 2 months after Jamal's funeral, and I had come home early from work because my shift got cut short. My parents were in the kitchen talking, and they did not hear me come in through the front door. "Charles, we need to be more careful about how we spend this money," Mama was saying. "People are going to start asking questions." "Gloria, we deserve this money," Daddy replied. "We lost our son. The community wanted to help us. This is them helping. But they think we are using the money for funeral expenses and bills. They do not know we are buying cars and jewelry. The funeral is paid for. Everything else is our business. If people want to donate money to our family, we can spend it however we want. I just worry that someone is going to notice and say something. Let them. What are they going to do? We are grieving parents who lost a child. Nobody is going to question us." I stood frozen in the hallway, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. My parents were using the GoFundMe money, the money that had been donated by people from our community who were struggling financially themselves, but had given whatever they could to help us honor Jamal's memory, to buy luxury items for themselves. The funeral had cost maybe $10,000 at most. That meant there was still approximately $70,000 that was supposed to be used for family support during our time of grief. But instead of using it to pay off debt, fix our house, or save for the future, my parents were treating it like a lottery jackpot. They were literally profiting from Jamal's death. I spent the next several days in a fog, trying to process what I had learned. Part of me wanted to confront my parents immediately and demand that they stop spending the money inappropriately. But part of me was afraid of what confronting them would do to our family dynamic and to my own living situation. I was 19 years old, working a warehouse job that paid barely above minimum wage, and living at home because I could not afford my own place. If I accused my parents of fraud and they kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. But every time I saw Daddy's new BMW in the driveway or Mama's designer purses on the kitchen table, I thought about the people who had donated to our GoFundMe campaign. Mrs. Washington, who lived on Social Security and had donated $50. The Lopez family down the street, who had 4 kids and had donated $20. Pastor Williams, who had used his personal credit card to donate $200. These were people who could barely afford to feed their own families, but they had given money because they believed it would help us through a difficult time. They believed they were honoring Jamal's memory and supporting a grieving family. They had no idea their donations were being used to fund my parents' shopping sprees. I started documenting everything I could about my parents' spending patterns. I took pictures of receipts I found in the trash. I noted when new luxury items appeared in our house. I kept track of conversations I overheard about purchases and spending. I also started researching GoFundMe fraud and what legal consequences existed for people who misused donated funds. What I learned was disturbing, but also empowering. GoFundMe fraud was a real and growing problem. People would create campaigns for fake emergencies, exaggerate medical conditions, or misrepresent how donated funds would be used. But it was also illegal. Depending on the circumstances, GoFundMe fraud could be prosecuted as wire fraud, theft by deception, or criminal misrepresentation. I also learned that donors had legal recourse if they could prove that campaign organizers had lied about how funds would be used. If my parents had explicitly stated that donations would be used for funeral expenses and family support during grief, but were actually using the money for luxury purchases, that could constitute fraud. The question was whether I had the courage to report my own parents for committing fraud using donations that were meant to honor my dead brother's memory. For several weeks, I struggled with this decision. On one hand, what my parents were doing was clearly wrong and disrespectful to Jamal's memory. On the other hand, they were still my parents, and reporting them would likely result in criminal charges that could send them to prison. But then something happened that made my decision easier. I was at the community center playing basketball with some friends when Mrs. Washington approached me. "Antoine, honey, how is your family doing?" she asked. "We are managing, Mrs. Washington, taking it day by day. I am so glad that the GoFundMe campaign was successful. At least your family does not have to worry about financial stress while you are grieving." "Yes, ma'am. The community really came through for us. I was telling my sister about it the other day. I said that in times of tragedy, communities can do beautiful things when they come together to support their own. Your family is a testament to that." I felt sick to my stomach listening to Mrs. Washington talk about how proud she was of the community's response and how glad she was that the money had helped our family. "Mrs. Washington, can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby. When you donated to the GoFundMe, what did you think the money would be used for?" "Well, funeral expenses first, of course. Making sure Jamal had a proper homegoing. And then I assumed the rest would help your mama and daddy with bills and expenses while they took time off work to grieve." "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering." That conversation confirmed what I already knew. People had donated money because they believed it would help our family with legitimate expenses related to Jamal's death and our grieving process. They had not donated so my parents could buy luxury cars and designer clothes. Mrs. Washington had donated $50, probably money she needed for her own groceries or medications, because she believed she was helping a family in need. And my parents were using that money and thousands of dollars from other people like her to fund a lifestyle they had never been able to afford before. That evening, I made a decision. I was going to report my parents to the authorities for GoFundMe fraud, even if it meant destroying our family and potentially sending them to prison. But first, I needed concrete evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered every piece of documentation I could find. I took pictures of my parents' bank statements that I found in Daddy's desk. I collected receipts for luxury purchases. I made copies of the BMW purchase agreement. I documented Mama's designer clothing purchases and jewelry receipts. I also contacted GoFundMe's fraud department and explained the situation. They provided me with copies of the original campaign description and a full accounting of all donations received and how the money had been withdrawn. According to GoFundMe's records, our family had received a total of $83,742 in donations. The funeral home had been paid $9,200 directly from the GoFundMe account. The remaining $74,542 had been transferred to my parents' personal bank account. I cross-referenced that amount with the bank statements I had found, and I traced approximately $65,000 in luxury purchases over the 2 months since Jamal's funeral. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. My parents had used money donated to honor Jamal's memory to buy themselves a BMW, designer clothes, jewelry, electronics, and other luxury items they had never been able to afford before. On a Monday morning in late September, I walked into the district attorney's office and filed a formal complaint of fraud against my parents. "Mr. Jackson," the assistant district attorney said after reviewing my evidence, "this is very serious. You understand that if we prosecute this case, your parents could face significant prison time. I understand, but they stole money from people who could not afford to give it. They used my brother's death to get rich. That is not right. I agree with you, and the evidence you have provided is compelling. We will open an investigation immediately." The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was so clear. Bank records showed exactly how the money had been spent. Receipts confirmed luxury purchases. The GoFundMe description explicitly stated that funds would be used for funeral expenses and family support during this difficult time, which did not include buying new cars and designer clothes. My parents were arrested 3 weeks later and charged with wire fraud and theft by deception. The total amount of fraudulently obtained and misused funds was calculated at approximately $65,000. The news spread through our community like wildfire. The same neighbors who had donated money and attended Jamal's funeral were now learning that the grieving parents they had supported were actually con artists who had used their son's death as a fundraising opportunity. "I cannot believe Charles and Gloria would do something like this," Mrs. Washington said when the news broke. "I gave them money I needed for my medications because I thought they needed help." The community's response was swift and brutal. People who had supported our family during our grief now felt betrayed and angry. Our house was vandalized with spray paint, calling my parents thieves and frauds. We received threatening phone calls and angry messages on social media. And everyone blamed me for turning in my own parents. "Antoine, how could you do this to your mama and daddy?" my Aunt Linda asked during an angry phone call. "They are still grieving Jamal, and now you have sent them to jail?" "Aunt Linda, they stole money from people who could barely afford to donate it. They used Jamal's death to buy luxury items for themselves. That money was given to help the family. How they chose to spend it is their business." "No, it is not. The people who donated believed the money would be used for specific purposes. Mama and Daddy lied about how they would use it. You are tearing this family apart. Mama and Daddy tore this family apart when they decided to profit from Jamal's death. The hardest part was facing my parents after they were arrested. They both made bail and were ordered to stay away from each other as a condition of their release. Mama went to stay with Aunt Linda, and Daddy stayed with his brother James. I stayed in our house alone, surrounded by the luxury items my parents had bought with stolen money, and haunted by memories of my brother who would never come home again. About a week after their arrest, Daddy came by the house to pick up some of his belongings. When he saw me, his face twisted with anger and hurt. "You destroyed our family," he said. "You sent your own parents to jail. You destroyed our family when you stole money that was meant to honor Jamal's memory. That money was donated to us. We had every right to use it how we saw fit." "No, Daddy. That money was donated to help with funeral expenses and support during grief. Not to buy you a BMW and Mama designer purses. You do not understand what we have been through. We lost our son. We deserve something good in our lives. You lost your son. I lost my brother. The difference is I am not using his death to get rich. You are 19 years old. You do not understand how the real world works. I understand that stealing is wrong. I understand that lying is wrong. And I understand that Jamal deserved better than having his memory disrespected by his own parents." Daddy picked up his bags and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back to look at me. "You are dead to me, Antoine. As of today, you are not my son. If being your son means staying silent while you steal from people who trusted you, then I am okay with not being your son." The trial began 4 months later, and it attracted significant media attention. The story of grieving parents who had stolen GoFundMe donations meant to honor their murdered son resonated with people far beyond our community. During the trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of my parents' fraudulent spending. Bank records, receipts, and witness testimony all confirmed that they had used donated funds for luxury purchases rather than legitimate family expenses. The defense attorneys tried to argue that my parents were so overcome with grief that they were not thinking clearly about their financial decisions. They portrayed Charles and Gloria Jackson as victims of trauma who had made poor choices but had not intended to commit fraud. But the prosecutors countered that argument by pointing out the systematic nature of the luxury purchases and the fact that my parents had actively hidden their spending from the community. These defendants knew exactly what they were doing, the prosecutor argued. They saw their son's death as an opportunity to collect money they otherwise never would have had access to. They lied to their community. They betrayed the trust of people who gave generously from their own limited resources, and they dishonored their dead son's memory for personal financial gain. I testified at the trial, and it was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. I had to sit in a courtroom and describe how my parents had used money donated to honor my brother's memory to fund a shopping spree for luxury items. "Mr. Jackson," the prosecutor asked me, "why did you decide to report your parents to the authorities?" "Because what they did was wrong. People from our community donated money they could barely afford to give because they believed it would help our family during a difficult time. They believed they were honoring my brother's memory. My parents betrayed that trust and disrespected Jamal's legacy. Were you afraid of the consequences of reporting them?" "Yes, I was terrified. But I was more afraid of letting them get away with using Jamal's death as a way to get rich." During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive son who was using the legal system to punish parents he had conflicts with. "Mr. Jackson, is it not true that you have had ongoing conflicts with your parents about their parenting style and family rules?" "We had normal parent-teenager disagreements, but that has nothing to do with why I reported their fraud." "You were angry at them, were you not?" "I was angry that they stole money meant to honor my dead brother. Any decent person would be angry about that. But you chose to report them to authorities rather than handling it within the family. Because what they did was not a family matter. It was a crime that hurt dozens of people who had trusted them." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. My parents were each sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of $65,000 to be distributed among the GoFundMe donors. The defendants exploited their son's tragic death for personal financial gain, the judge said during sentencing. They betrayed their community's trust and dishonored their son's memory. Their actions were not those of grieving parents making poor decisions. They were calculated acts of fraud that deserve significant punishment. After the sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters asking for my reaction. "My brother Jamal was 16 years old when he was killed," I said. "He had dreams of playing college basketball and making something of himself. He was kind, hardworking, and loved by everyone who knew him. The community came together to honor his memory and support our family, but my parents chose to dishonor that support by stealing from the people who tried to help us. What they did was wrong, and they deserve to face consequences for their actions." "Do you have any regrets about reporting your parents?" one reporter asked. "My only regret is that my parents made choices that forced me to choose between protecting them and honoring my brother's memory. I chose to honor Jamal, and I would make that choice again tomorrow." In the aftermath of the trial, the remaining GoFundMe funds that had not been spent on luxury items, approximately $9,000, were returned to donors proportionally based on their contribution amounts. GoFundMe also refunded some donations using their own funds as a gesture of goodwill. The community's reaction to the trial verdict was mixed. Some people praised me for having the courage to report fraud even when it involved my own parents. Others criticized me for sending my parents to prison when they were still grieving the loss of their son. "Antoine did the right thing," Mrs. Washington told a local news reporter. "I gave money I could not afford to give because I believed it would help a family in need. Charles and Gloria Jackson lied to all of us, and Antoine had the courage to hold them accountable. But my Aunt Linda told the same reporter, Antoine destroyed his family over money. His parents are in prison, and he is all alone. Was it worth it? I spent a lot of time thinking about Aunt Linda's question. Was it worth it? Was sending my parents to prison worth the destruction of my family relationships, the loneliness of living alone, and the burden of being known as the son who turned in his own parents? The answer for me was yes, because every time I doubted my decision, I thought about Jamal. I thought about the 16-year-old kid who had dreams of playing college basketball, who worked hard in school, who made everyone around him smile. I thought about how his life was cut short by senseless violence, and how his death should have been a moment for the community to come together in grief and solidarity. Instead, my parents had turned his death into a business opportunity. They had taken money from people who loved Jamal and wanted to honor his memory, and they had used that money to buy things they did not need and did not deserve. Jamal's memory deserved better than that. The people who donated deserved better than that. And I was the only person willing to stand up and say so. Today, I am 22 years old and working as a community organizer focused on gun violence prevention. I use Jamal's story to talk about the devastating impact of gun violence on Black communities and the importance of coming together to create change. I also advocate for better oversight of crowdfunding campaigns and legal protections for donors who believe their money is being misused. Jamal's case led to changes in how GoFundMe handles fraud complaints and how donors can seek recourse when campaign organizers misuse funds. My parents are currently serving their prison sentences, and we have had minimal contact since their conviction. Mama has written me a few letters saying she understands why I did what I did, but Daddy has not spoken to me since the trial. I have made peace with the fact that my relationship with my parents may never be repaired. Some people believe that family loyalty means protecting your parents no matter what they do, but I believe that family loyalty means holding people accountable when they do wrong, especially when their actions dishonor someone you loved. Jamal was my little brother, my best friend, and the person I believed would make it out of our neighborhood and show everyone what was possible. His death was tragic and senseless, and it left a hole in my heart that will never completely heal. But at least I can say that I honored his memory by standing up for what was right, even when standing up meant losing my relationship with my parents and becoming the most hated person in some members of my extended family. Antoine, Mrs. Washington said to me recently, you did right by your brother. Jamal would be proud of the man you have become. That validation means more to me than any relationship I lost in the process of holding my parents accountable. Because at the end of the day, the most important question was not whether I was a good son to my parents. The question was whether I was a good brother to Jamal. And by refusing to let his memory be used for fraud and profit, I believe I honored him in the way he deserved. 3 years ago, Jamal was murdered on the sidewalk outside our house. His death devastated our family and our community. People came together to support us, to honor his memory, and to help us through an impossible time. My parents betrayed that support and dishonored Jamal's memory for luxury cars and designer clothes. And I made sure they faced consequences for that betrayal, even though it cost me my relationship with them. Some people call me a hero for standing up against fraud. Some people call me a traitor for turning in my own parents. But I call myself Jamal's brother, and that identity matters more to me than any other label people want to put on me. Because Jamal deserved better than what happened to him in life, and he definitely deserved better than what my parents tried to do with his death. Honoring his memory by fighting fraud and holding people accountable was the least I could do for the little brother who never got to play college basketball, never got to graduate high school, never got to become the man he was meant to be. There are more stories like mine, guys who refused to stay silent, who broke the cycle instead of repeating it. 2 of them are right here on your screen. Click the one that speaks to your own fight. And if you want to walk with a community that knows sometimes saving your family means stopping them, tap the bell. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.